So, dear students, welcome back once again to online classes day 3, reading the best Christmas present in the world. Final part, taught by Ajay. As we have read how the author got custody of that roll top disc, he bowed that. After that, he went for the restoring and he found a letter by Mr. Jim to her wife Connie, in which he describes that how the Christmas Day was celebrated during the World War One. He explained how much peace he felt in the no man's land during World War, how they enjoyed eating, playing, and laughing. Now, in final part, we'll come to know about how this story ends. So let's start the reading first. Here we go. Now, I folded the letter again and slipped it carefully back into its envelope. I kept awake all night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove into Bridport, just a few miles away. I asked a boy walking his dog where Copper Beaches was. House number 12 turned out to be nothing but a burned out shell. The roof gaping, the windows boarded up. I knocked at the house next door and I asked if anyone knew the whereabouts of a Mrs. Macpherson. Oh, yes, said the old man in his slippers. He knew her well. A lovely old lady, he told me, a bit muddled headed, but at her age she was entitled to be. Wasn't she? 101 years old. She had been in the house when it caught fire. No one really knew how the fire had started, but it could well have been candles. She used candles rather than electricity because she always thought electricity was too expensive. The fireman had got her out in the time. She was in a nursing home now, he told me. Burlington House on the Dorchester Road on the other side of the town. I found Burlington House nursing home easily enough. There were paper chains up in the hallway and lighted Christmas tree stood in the corner with a lopsided angle on top. I said I was a friend come to visit Mrs. Macpherson to bring her Christmas present. I could see through into the dining room where everyone was wearing a paper hat and singing. The matron had a hat on too and seemed happy enough to see me. She even offered me a mince pie. She walked me along the corridor. Mrs. Macpherson is not in with the others, she told me. She she has rather confused today, so we thought it best if she had a good rest. She has no family, no one visits. So I'm sure she'll be only too pleased to see you. She took me into a conservatory with wicker chairs and potted plants all around and left me. The old lady was sitting in a wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. She had silver white hair pinned into a wispy bun. She was gazing out at the garden. Hello, I said. She turned and looked up at me vacantly. Happy Christmas, Connie, I went on. I found this. I think it is yours. As I was speaking, her eyes never left my face. I opened the tin box and gave it to her. That was the moment her eyes lit up with recognition, and her face became suffused with a sudden glow of happiness. I explained about the desk, about how I found it, but I don't think she was listening. For a while, she said nothing but stroked the letter tenderly with her fingertips. Suddenly, she reached out and took my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You told me you would come home by Christmas, dearest," she said, "and here you are, the best Christmas present in the world. Come closer, Jim dear, sit down." I sat down beside her and she kissed my cheek. "I read your letter so often, Jim, every day. I wanted to hear your voice in my head. It always made me feel you were with me, and now you are. Now you are back, you can read it to me yourself. Would you do that for me, Jim dear? I just want to hear your voice again." "I would love that so much. And then perhaps we'll have some tea. I have made you a nice Christmas cake, marzipan all around. I know how much you love marzipan." And that's end of the story. So, as we can understand the conclusion that how author meets Mrs. Connie, and when he met, he was recognized as Mr. Jim, and he had all the love of Jim to him. So you can now tell me the central theme of this story. As we have read the emotional part of the story in end, where she was all alone at 101 years in hospital. That was the age. Now, my dear students, I would like to introduce you Mr. Michael Morpurgo. Since you have read his story, so you must know why he used war stories in education, and especially for the children. So here we go. We are now going to hear from him about this. Thank you. This was the last session and the final portion of the chapter. We are closing and you'll be getting assignment in your mail. So till then, take care. Have a good time.
Welcome everyone to this very special conversation with master storyteller Michael Morpurgo, Sir Michael Morpurgo, I should say.
Michael will do.
On the occasion of the centenary of the armistice.
Yeah.
Which leads in nicely to my first question. Given that it is the armistice centenary, why do you think it's important that children learn about war, read about war?
Because it's out there. It was out there then, and we all know it's out there now. Part of our problem, really, is that we've all been brought up post-war into a world of security, and certainly the expectation that everything's going to be all right, it will be a world without war. And the more we see of the world out there, the more we realize that wars are going on all the time. And the children will have glimpses of, I'm not saying they're not going to be looking at these programs for long, but they will see glimpses of bombed houses in Syria and children being carried off to hospital. So they'll know this stuff goes on. They may not know how far away it is from home, but they'll know that it's what a lot of families in this world are living through. So to go back to a time in the First World War and the Second World War, particularly the First World War now, when a country was completely plunged into war, everyone in society was involved in this war, at home and abroad. So the women were looking after the children, they were working in the factories, they were keeping the farms going, and the men were off there doing the fighting, and the women were doing the nursing. Everyone was involved in this thing, and the losses were huge. So in a way, it's a metaphor for the destruction that a war can inflict on society then And it's a history lesson that it can happen again and that we mustn't forget it. And neither must we forget, therefore, those people who left this country and were fighting against a power that wanted to take over Europe and invade England if it could. They had to be stopped. And those young men went off and did their best. We can think what we like about the justification for the war now, but most of those young men came home, but close on 1 million didn't. So they never had the life I've had of growing up, having a family of my own, being a father, being a grandfather, great-grandfather. All that was denied to them, the fulfillment of all your hopes and dreams, they didn't have. And what did they die for? In my view, they died because they had to win that war. Why? Because they wanted to stop the advance of tyranny and keep our freedoms, and they wanted to keep their families at home safe.